Hello and welcome to Beyond Today, the program that addresses the future of our community through conversations with people who are working today for a better tomorrow. I'm Ray Charmonti, your host for Beyond Today and Assistant Executive Director for the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission. In our last program, we discussed pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods. Today, we want to look at historic preservation and in particular, historic preservation as an economic development tool. Our guests today have been very involved in this area. Stephanie Farrell, who is an architect and consultant specializing in historic preservation, and Rebecca Gagalis, a planner and specialist in economic development activities in Ybor City. Rebecca, I think I'll start with you and welcome both of you to the show. But you've been involved in historic preservation, I think, for quite some time. Can you give us a little history of how you got involved and what your background is?
Ray, yes, I really happened into it, although my undergraduate degree is in art and architectural history. It just so happened I ended up living in a historic district in Baltimore, Maryland back in the late 70s and early 80s. And in fact, it was a 200-year-old neighborhood on the waterfront in Baltimore, and there were a lot of preservation issues, and there were issues of highways going through the neighborhood. So it turned out that I ended up working for the city of Baltimore and living in the neighborhood and trying to bring about the revitalization of the neighborhood I lived in. So that's kind of how I got started. I also ended up working or being assigned to historic districts in Minneapolis when I was there for a couple of years, and was very fortunate coming back to Tampa in the late 80s after working for the Planning Commission for a couple of years to get involved in the Ybor City project.
Are you originally from this area, or are you from Baltimore?
No, actually I'm from Michigan and really grew up in Florida and moved to Baltimore and made the circle back to Florida over a few years just by happenstance.
So you have some roots here then?
Yes.
Stephanie, how about your background? You're an architect that specializes, I guess, in historic preservation. How did you come to be doing that?
Ray, I always had an interest in older architecture, particularly in urban design, and I had studied architecture in Venice as part of my degree in architecture. And as I worked in the field of architecture, I became more and more interested in participating in more urban affairs and more historic buildings. So I began to volunteer on the evenings and on weekends, and worked with a group of architects, young architects. I was one of the young architects at the time, to try to save the Sulphur Springs Arcade, and worked with the Historic Preservation Board at that time to do some planning in West Tampa, and applied for a HUD Livable Cities grant. And as I was in the process of doing that volunteer work, I was offered a job with the Historic Preservation Board as the architect for the board, and a couple of years later became the director of the Historic Preservation Board. So it was happenstance in a way, but definitely driven by a long time interest in it.
When was the Historic Preservation Board created?
Well, it was created by state legislation in 1975 and staffed in 77. I started in March of 1978, which definitely dates me. So it's been certainly the vast majority of my career. I've been with the board, and most of its time of its existence. Now it went out of business and became a regional office in May of this year, and I left the board in March to really pursue my interest in historic preservation as economic development. Obviously the theme of this show, so it fits what I'm doing with my career at this point. It seems to me that historic buildings are part of what make cities interesting. What makes great cities great is really a combination of historic buildings and good new buildings, and obviously good planning and good landscaping and all of those things. But historic preservation, I think, sort of sets the core, sets the tone of what a city can be. So I've been involved in it from that point of view.
Great. Rebecca, I know you're have been involved in the area that I think most people do identify as being a historic area here in Hillsborough County, and that's Ybor City. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement
Sure.
in Ybor City?
Really, until recently, for the last 8 years until about November of '97, I had been out in Ybor working for the Ybor City Development Corporation, which became under the umbrella of the City of Tampa 2 years ago. And the program was designed to help facilitate the redevelopment of the district. The stage was set, the district was essentially designated, there was a plan for redevelopment, and we were the implementing arm that came in. And it was a very small staff with a working board of directors of people that had an expertise to offer and help to give, and there were excellent group of board members for all those years that gave a lot of free time, and I think we made a lot of headway. By the time that I left the Development Corporation, over 200,000 square feet of renovated space had occurred in those 8 years, and something like 130 or 40 new businesses, and a capital investment of over $40 million. And now there's just tremendous announcements that are occurring for planned projects that total even twice again that amount. So I think we feel that the revitalization of Ybor City is happening, and many buildings have been saved. You know, historic preservation has provided the backdrop for that to happen. The incentives that have been designed are geared towards preserving the buildings, and all those, the backdrop and the tools make it possible to undertake very successful and quick economic development.
There, I guess, was a difference in the level of activity when you first went to work for the Development Corporation and now. What was going on 8 years ago? Not a whole lot, was
Not
it?
really. There was a very high vacancy rate. I don't know if I can remember the numbers off the top of my head, but at least 75% of the buildings had significant code problems. There was a lot of vacancy, I'd say 50% or more. 7th Avenue there were a couple of key uses that existed, Ybor Square and the Columbia Restaurant at either end, but there wasn't a lot in the middle, viable use. In fact, Tampa Electric came in the early years in 1988 and made the first major investment in the district when they built the TECO data center. And that initial investment seemed to spur other individuals in their efforts to come in and make investments in individual buildings. So it was really kind of a seat of the pants grassroots effort where smaller developers, from the most parts, followed Tampa Electric's lead and started to renovate buildings one at a time. Now we're getting the bigger projects, but that's been that was very difficult in the initial years to attract the bigger developers.
Stephanie, I know we're going to talk about Ybor City some more a little bit later, but Ybor City, tell us about the different type of districts. Now, Ybor City is very special in Hillsborough County. What is that?
Ybor City is our only National Historic Landmark District, which is the highest order of national recognition of a significant collection of buildings and neighborhoods. There are only 3 National Historic Landmark districts in the state of Florida, and probably less than a couple of dozen around the country. So indeed, it is extremely important.
So there isn't that many even on a national basis.
No,
so
no.
we are fairly unique. And what are the others in Florida, out of curiosity?
There is one in Pensacola, and then also in Key West in the Florida Keys. So those are the 3.
Okay, interesting. I thought you would say St. Augustine, possibly.
It isn't.
but-
It's St. Augustine is a National Register district, but not a National Landmark district.
Interesting. Now, what other historic areas do we have in Hillsborough County? I know people know about Ybor City, but there are others.
Well, we have other districts that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and those include West Tampa, Hyde Park, which is obviously no surprise to anybody, Seminole Heights, and Tampa Heights as well. And each of those, with the exception of West Tampa, are also designated by the City of Tampa as local historic districts. So we have had a long history of recognizing the importance of our past, and I think that's obviously to our credit.
Now, this whole issue, I guess, of historic preservation and economic development, there's probably some tension in that. I guess when you think economic development, you think new, modern. I know most people probably, if you asked them what economic development meant, they wouldn't necessarily think historic preservation. So show us how this tie works, I guess, from your perspective, Rebecca.
You know, the way I looked at it was positive, that the fact that we had an historic district in Ybor City gave us an automatic marketing tool for the district. And marketing...
Sort of a signature.
Yep. Marketing towards for redevelopment purposes is so important. That is the most important thing. So we had something of interest that could attract attention, not only from the media, but then that spins off in what the consequence was, that it brought in investment. So the preservation I haven't seen as in conflict or a difficult hurdle to overcome. We do have a design, we do have a design review board in Ybor City, and you know, sometimes you'll hear that people think that it's difficult to get through that process, or it drives costs up somewhat, but I think we've balanced that on the other side by giving incentives, and those incentives endeavor to create a good investment opportunity in Ybor.
Mm-hmm.
Stephanie, do you see any conflicts or?
Oh, well, certainly there have been conflicts, but I think that developers who have some savvy in terms of developing in urban areas look at vacant historic buildings just like they would a vacant lot or vacant property. They're resources to be developed. So you can, you know, as a developer, focus on historic properties or vacant properties, or a combination thereof. It's part of the overall palette. And you know, from time to time, there are conflicts between development of vacant parcels versus the redevelopment of historic buildings. But you know, with a few notable exceptions, that hasn't really been a real big problem in Tampa. And I think, as Rebecca also said, one of the reasons that the redevelopment of historic properties has been so successful is because there are a number of incentives that are available. There are incentives that the City of Tampa has specifically tailored to Ybor and some of the other historic districts, but there also are federal historic preservation tax credits for the rehabilitation of buildings that are listed on the National Register or included in an historic district. And that, for example, is 20% of the cost of the rehabilitation, so that if someone spent $100,000 on the rehabilitation of a historic residence for income purposes, the tax credit would be $20,000. On a larger building, such as the Floridan Hotel, which is the redevelopment of that is being planned even as we speak. A project like that is probably $17 or $18 million worth of rehabilitation costs, and the tax credits there would be $3.4 million. Wow. So that's a big deal.
Well, these are some significant issues, and when we come back, we're going to discuss some of the unique characteristics of economic development when you're doing it in a historic area. We'll be right back.
Hands need hands to help you see what lies ahead, what you want to be. Hands need hands, a hand to reach.
Kids today need extra help to stay in school. Communities and Schools brings hands in need together with hands that can help.
For Susan Chang, who spends most of her income on rent. For Felicia Hicks, whose 3 children still share the same bedroom. And for Jose Saban, who dreams of one day parking in his own garage. Introducing 1-888-HOME for Us, the toll-free call that gives you all the information you'll need to own your first home. Call now. Remember, the help is yours free, but a home is yours forever.
That's my dad. And that's Mom. Dad's got an idea, a way to get rid of all the grody garbage that's polluting the world. He's invented a big rocket ship to shoot all the garbage into outer space. Mom's not sure, but Dad says his invention will save the world.
There's an easier way to save the world. Recycle. For your free recycling action guide, write Recycle. Environmental Defense Fund, 257 Park Avenue South, New York, New York.
Welcome back to Beyond Today. I'm your host, Ray Shermonti, and we've been discussing historic preservation and economic development with Stephanie Farrell and Rebecca Gagalis. I wanted to kind of get in more of the economic development aspects, and Rebecca, you did mention that you're working for Tampa Electric now, and
Yes.
They have a number of projects, I guess, in Ybor City. Can you tell us about that?
That's an aspect of what I'm doing now for Tampa Electric. We already had been working with Tampa Electric while I was with Ybor City Development on some projects that I believe really assist with the economic development program. One is a district cooling project in which Tampa Electric, in conjunction with the Tampa Bay Train Company, is building a large chiller plant, and chilled water will actually be piped to various developments in Ybor City to not only save them, the individual developers, the upfront costs of installing their own equipment, air conditioning equipment, but also will save the unsightly need for each individual development to have its own system. And that really does assist aesthetically with the district's efforts towards redevelopment and new development. Also, we've worked on a couple of lighting projects in Ybor City, and that continues, in which we're trying to provide new types of lighting, white lighting that will enhance the building facades and make them more visible at night, as well as help with security. So Tampa Electric has been very involved. In fact, they served on the Development Corporation Board of Directors since it was created in 1988. And they continue. So I get to continue my efforts in more of a peripheral way, and that's exciting to me. I really enjoy doing, continuing to be involved in Ybor.
Great. Stephanie, Rebecca brought up the issue of cooling the buildings, but I know there's a lot of other issues that people don't realize. I know when Ybor City kind of wasn't redeveloping, one of the reasons probably was it was difficult to meet modern codes in an older building. What are some of those type of problems that you have with a historic building? And I know that there's been some things done now that have lessened that, I believe, anyway. But
Well, one of the things that I think is important for people to know is that there is a state model historic preservation code that has been adopted by several communities, and it's my understanding that Tampa is the first community that adopted the historic preservation standards that are now part of what the City of Tampa uses for its building code. And it provides sort of a point system for trying to meet building code requirements, such as exit widths and fire protection and so forth. It doesn't really lessen the requirements, but it allows you to allows a contractor and the developer and owner and so forth to meet the intent of the law using various techniques. So it gives the building department a lot more flexibility. And I know that that has been helpful to a number of people.
When did that go into effect?
It was about 2 years ago.
Okay, so it's new then.
It is new. It is new.
There's one other thing that I think really assisted over the years. It was passed probably in 1990-91, and that was a waiver of on-site stormwater retention requirements, at least those requirements that the city made in addition to what's required by the state. That helped in Ybor. That helped such that that the individual developer wouldn't have to create vaults within the building to retain the water, which is a very expensive proposition.
Yeah, I'm sure most people don't realize that in an older building before they would be required to create like a retention pond to hold water, like a new development, how difficult that would be in an area like Ybor City. And that certainly did probably hold back development in an area like that. So we are removing some of the obstacles now, and this may be helping with this type of economic development that we're seeing.
And Rebecca may have mentioned it, but excuse me, there are also waivers from parking requirements in the Ybor Historic District. So that allows a developer to use parking that is on site that may or may not be owned by him and still achieve the parking that is required for the building to function, but not have additional code requirements on top of that.
Now, would we allow on-street parking to count toward the developer's parking, or would it have
Actually,
to be?
it's waived. The way that the code is set up is that parking is waived, and there's an in lieu fee, and that has also been waived.
As an incentive.
And it's really in the 7th Avenue area, primarily in the HCC area, not district-wide. Also, in the late 80s, transportation impact fees were waived, just in Ybor City, based on the convincing case that the National Historic Landmark District deserved to have that kind of concession in order to help it revitalize.
Well, it certainly seems to have helped because we have seen all this activity. And kind of discussing the activity, I wondered if maybe you could tell our viewers what are some of the things going on in Ybor City. It seems like I read a lot just the other day about a new apartment complex. What's happening there?
Well, you know, I'm not directly involved anymore, but before leaving the city, it had become very clear that finally residential developers were very interested in Ybor City, upscale rental apartments. So one of the last things I did was help write a request for proposals for the remaining assembled vacant city-owned land. And I'm sure the mayor and city staff are very excited that they got 3 very good responses back and now are in the process of reviewing those. The other real important project, not to say the smaller projects aren't important because a lot of those are happening, but there's a major entertainment project planned by a developer out of Miami, Jaromir Steiner of Steiner and Associates, and the Semler companies out of St. Petersburg. And that is a 200,000 square foot entertainment complex which involves movies, retail, and restaurants. And that is a significant historic preservation project as well because it involves one of the most significant buildings not only in the city of Tampa but probably in the entire country, the Centro Español.
Can you tell us a little bit about that building?
Yes, that building is located on 7th Avenue adjacent to a city-owned plaza, so there's a lot of opportunity for its redevelopment and exposure to 7th Avenue. And I think that's kind of maybe a good example of how historic preservation and new development can work together, because Steiner and Semler's development is probably predominantly new construction, but they have said that the most important aspect of it is how the development fronts on 7th Avenue, and its window on 7th Avenue is the Centro Español, and they are very interested in restoring it and rehabilitating it to meet historic preservation standards while using it for current needs. And they have found that to be quite possible. They're in the architectural and planning process and financing process now, and I think that will be a very good example of how historic preservation and new development can work. The building is extremely important, as Rebecca said. It is an individual National Historic Landmark. I can't tell you how many there are of those in the country, but I can tell you that it's one of 2 in Hillsborough County. The other one is the University of Tampa, known historically as the Tampa Bay Hotel. That was our first National Historic Landmark, and the Centro Español in Ybor is the second. So it's an extremely important and very handsome building that was built in 1912 by the Centro Español, which was a membership organization of predominantly immigrants from Spain, a cultural and other center for that community. Now, as you know, the Spanish and Cuban and Italian and German and other communities are very well dispersed in our community, and I think that's a real plus for us. But what that did is that left the Centro Español without a use or a user, and it has been vacant for well, pretty close to a decade. So Steiner and Sembler, who are known to be developers par excellence, will become historic preservationists as well.
Now, do they have experience in historic preservation type of economic development, or is this their first venture?
Well, Steiner and Associates, and probably Rebecca can add some information to that. Their, I guess, most well-known development is called Cocoa Walk in Coconut Grove, which is an historic district in the Miami area. So they're familiar with integrating development into the fabric of an historic community. So I think they bring that you know, very good experience to our community, and we're fortunate to have them.
Now, I guess that building was the first of those social clubs in Ybor City then, I would assume?
Well, there were several that were built at around and about the same time. The Italian club was slightly after that. The Cuban club was right around that time. The German-American club was built in 1908. So they all date from that
which is
from
being
that time
restored
period,
now, I believe,
which
as
is
we
being,
speak.
yes, a good example of economic development.
How long was that building vacant? That's on Nebraska, I believe.
Oh,
a long time.
A very long time. It was occupied by a fraternal organization known as the Los Caballeros de la Luz, and they vacated, I believe it was probably 8 or 9 years ago.
At least.
And there were several developments proposed for it, but no one was able to really put it together. Probably the financing was an issue. And I guess one of the exciting aspects of what's happening with the building now is that the city of Tampa, and I would say with the mayor's vision, began talking with Tampa Bay Economic Development Corporation about the potential for redeveloping it. And the city agreed to lease the majority of the space, and that made the project a feasible economic development project. In Tampa Bay Economic Development Corporation was able to put together the financing with some of their own dollars and local bank funding as well to rehabilitate the building for office space, and it's really quite lovely. It's a very grand, basically mostly theater space with a balcony that overlooks the stage area. The stage area has been converted to conference rooms to meet today's needs, and the main level is now mostly city office space. So it's really quite handsome, and that building was on the verge of demolition.
I think that one thing that's real important about that building is that it's so visible from the interstate by anybody that's coming through Tampa off of I-4. And to see that building redone has said a lot for, you know, the city and its
yeah, I agree.
revitalization
It's located,
efforts.
right, I agree. It's located at the corner of Palm and Nebraska, so if people want to look at it, they can drive by.
Well, I'd like to thank today's guest for talking with us about historic preservation as an economic development tool. As you can see, there's a lot going on in Ybor City and all over Tampa with historic preservation. Next month, we'll talk about stormwater runoff. Let us know if you have any comments about today's show. You can reach us at our hotline or on email as listed here. I'm Ray Sharmonti, and on behalf of the Planning Commission, I thank you for thinking beyond today.